Hey guys, this is RuRoniK95 here. Once again, it's time for a manga review video. Yes, this time we're going to be reviewing Fushigi Yuugi the Mysterious Play Volume 3. Yes, this is going to be the first time I'm going to review this, which I should have done until now. Well, on behalf of this, let's review this manga. Chapter 13, The Invisible Enemy. So this basically story where it takes off where Tamahome noticed something from what's going on from above until about who is basically this person who comes from out of nowhere. How, if they weren't mistaken, particularly if they wanted to know. He doesn't realize if Miyaka Yuki was alright until they found that those bodies were dead from out of nowhere because they don't know who killed them from above. They said that the priestess of Suzaku, the Kuidong, I've always wanted to attend. If they could realize about how what Noriko and Tamahome had a lot to do for this particular story, of how this progresses, on how it's going on in its own little certain matter, just to consider the fact of how they wanted to know about this stickler fella when they were captured by those. Particularly when Miyaka Yuki woke up the next morning, she could have realized if Tamahome is there, but Noriko was there, woken up as well. If they could realize of what Tamahome is going as well to the home village, especially of how Tamahome wants to visit his home in the village, particularly see how somebody was doing in this chapter of the manga, particularly according to the fact of how this is going, of how the crops won't grow, particularly of how because he basically wanted to visit his father, particularly if he's doing all right, especially because he told his father that he's the man of the house, but that's how his decision comes, particularly of how Jalian doesn't want Tamahome to go until this wasn't long till Miyaka Yuki arrived, particularly, especially how what they were up to, especially of how, because she's still in junior high, particularly what Miyaka always wanted to do for this particular reason. Tamahome has to stay with someone who is sick as well. But then when she went off to the water, particularly until something from out of nowhere, until something suspicious behind Miyaka Yuki, until Tamahome wants to rescue, something might have attacked Miyaka Yuki, until Tamahome arrives as well, particularly what you see in this chapter right there. Yeah, because he doesn't know basically how they could figure out when. Yeah, because he has to save Miyaka Yuki, because it's basically that cat guy. Yeah, this guy right here, especially. They want to know who that is as well, particularly of how they wanted to figure out how they've been searching all along, of how they wanted to figure out as well. Chapter 14, Let Me Protect You. This chapter goes on of how something is really happening going on. Something of how it's happening in the village as well. Especially when Tamahome has to stop the blokes that are causing this trouble in its own particular way. Especially of how Miyaka wants to figure out how they wanted to stop this person as well. As how after something caught Noriko as well. And there's something written on this cat guy's knee as well, particularly of how they could realize of this. Yeah, in this chapter, when I can understand why. When Noriko was basically didn't know if Miyaka or Tamahome is there, particularly in this chapter of how they wanted to know. But this cat guy character introduces himself as Chichiri because he doesn't like being called cat guy. Yeah, this is the first appearance of Chichiri in that one. Yep. When Miyako has realized of how the apologies of saying it's our own fault, but Tamahome's father said it was an honor, basically, for their own modesties of how this basically goes, of how they realized. If she doesn't have the tent of how something's going on to her mind, of how they would never find a priestess, right, until there's enemies, basically, until Miyaka Yuki figure out something what is going on when she was going to Kudong alone. When Hotohori realized of how there's enormous premonition if Miyaka Yuki is safe, particularly if he could figure out something. By this time, of course, they were getting late, particularly of how she was going. Something about Yui as well. If she would realize if Yui was there all along, but she was going to Kudong, which is basically there was a shortcut as well as she could figure out until a tiger wanted to attack Miyaka Yuki as well. But she wants to have their chance to fight the tiger, but the tiger is too cunning and intimidating until Tamahome arrived as well, particularly in this part. When Tamahome has to fight off the tiger, especially of how if she could realize, because Tamahome wants to protect Miyaka Yuki, and how he feels of how he has the affectionate feelings towards Miyaka Yuki. Yeah, especially for the moments as well, accordingly to the fact of how this has gotten going. And on top of this, by this time of how, if they could figure out of how what Tamahome's family would have happened to the cause, basically of how something wrong to Miyaka, but he has to go get it, but she has to better wait there until Tamahome has took off. But Miyaka didn't know if she could figure out something about when she wants to find Yui, if she is there. Chapter 15, Captive Women. This chapter explaining about how if she could figure out if Yui is there, when she was basically on the verge of how she could figure out if she was there, but until she runs into somebody else as well, particularly as how this chapter goes. But when Tamahome realized that Miyaka Yuki went alone when she went off to Kudong on her own. Yeah, because Noriko thinks that Tamahome is going by herself because he knows what Miyaka was up to something as well. Accordingly, because he doesn't know the fact of how he basically loved Miyaka Yuki as well, particularly. Especially if there's the universe of the four gods, particularly, what has a lot to do. Meanwhile, of course, Hotohori has the regrets of these words of how he could dispatch the soldier for his soldiers, of how the priestess of Suzaku may return, particularly to the village as well. When they passed through the village, when they wanted to reach Kudong as well, particularly at this time, they seemed to do something particularly of how they wanted to realize of how she was heading, that they realized that Miyaka Yuki was heading off through the village towards Kudong in this chapter. Yeah, because this has gotten to a point of how, hasn't it? speaking of which, if they want to say something, they thought this girl was from another world. She could have been a Seiryu, or they thought she couldn't be the priestess of Seiryu, or if she's the priestess of Suzaku, because she wants to know if Yui hasn't found yet, particularly how until some stranger from out of nowhere with his horse who's got blue eyes in this part errands of see who is this person, this strange figure. How the general wants to realize of how they wanted to know who is that stranger who claimed to be the priestess of Seiryu, of how this got to the attention, of how to give them the piece of their own medicine, as how they wanted to realize of who is that person. Could have been somebody else or someone. That's how when Chichiri and Tamahome could figure out what to do, something of how they could want to know was something happening from above. By this time, they think that Miyaka Yuki is the priestess of Seiryu, which is recounted in the universe of the four gods, which something has got her in a shocking truth, particularly of how this goes on, particularly accordingly, until it was somebody else. They think because he was the general, as particularly of how to the border checkpoint, as how something wanted to go particularly, until they wanted to know who is there, until she found out that Yui was there. Yep, this made Miyaka Yuki shocked that Yui was there all along from the very beginning as well. If it was really her, she realized that Yui is all right, that she is basically still alive, because she's thankful that Yui is there. Yeah, particularly what you see in that one, because it was such a relief for Miyaka Yuki as how this basically wanted to go. If they think that she is the priestess of the Suzaku as well. Okay, chapter 16, the priestess of Seiryu. So basically, this chapter goes on as how the guards got Yui and Miyaka Yuki around it on there, particularly how they thought the intruder has broken through the gate. But then Yui and Miyaka wanted to ditch those guards basically when they wanted to escape from out of nowhere, of how if they think she's the priestess of Seiryu, and then that means that they'll become enemies. If she thought that Yui would be the priestess of Seiryu, then this means they'll be enemies in particular. But she realized how she got a scar on her hand, because she knew the man saved her as well, particularly until the rain comes as well. Tamahome wanted to know where is Miyaka Yuki, until he wanted to know where she was been up to, especially in this part as well. And on top of all of this, the battle between Tamahome and this other guy, there's always one, of how there's a constellation, they think how it's happening as well, of how there's the constellations of the Suzaku are gotten to the point as how this basically, until she realized of who, if Tamahome is there. Yui was introduced to Tamahome, basically, of how if they could have realized to the fact if Miyaka Yuki was there in this part. And for some reason is that this has gone to the thing of how it has really of how the facts of how that man feels the way of how she wants to if they want to get the universe of the four gods, how they can get back to Hongnan. That's how they wanted to figure out. They knew there's. If they thought that, yeah, because she's basically not the priestess of Seiryu. Yeah, because she claims that she's. They thought that Yui is the priestess of Seiryu, but she is not. Yeah, because she is none of it. Because she's Miyaka's friend since they were in junior high, particularly of how they could have realized they shot. She's from another world, particularly. But when this has gotten to the moments of how Tamahome has the affection feelings for Miyaka in this parts as well. And if Yui could have realized if she's in love with Tamahome as how this particularly goes. Yeah, because they thought, because she told Tamahome that he saved Yui and he has to be the good guy, particularly, from danger, as a little misunderstanding. What this has gotten to their minds as well, particularly, of how until something suspicious arrived, particularly when Chichiri basically has appeared once again as well. Of how they want to know if that dragon was there, particularly of how they might have been the heroine of the story of the priestess of Suzaku, of how something has got to her in the progress as well. And she doesn't know, basically, according to the fact of how that she thought that Tamahome won't be coming, basically. She thought it was a joke or something. So this basically how might have got to her. She thought it was Miyaka Yuki's fault for how. Yeah, Yui says she wants to take Tamahome from Miyaka as well. Until Nakago arrived. Yeah. Yeah, that's the appearance of that as well. When Nakago realized of how it's basically of how a celestial warrior of the Seiryu as well. Yeah. Because this basically how Yui has lost interest in Miyaka because she found out that she wanted to take Tamahome from Miyaka in this chapter, basically. Yeah, that's pretty much how this happened. And particularly. Chapter 17, Souls Drifting Apart. When something happens about how Yui has walking away from Miyaka as well, particularly of how if Miyaka could have realized if she is the priestess of Seiryu, then Yui would be Miyaka's enemy. Even though they thought, if she could have thought if Miyaka Yuki is the priestess of Suzaku, particularly in this part. Well, that's the thing, though. And meanwhile, from above, Chichiri could have got the ideas of how something was happening going on. When she until they saw something happening as how they found the universe of the four gods. If somebody said it was just a dream until he found that, somebody found the book, particularly transport as well. And for some reason is that Chichiri has saved Miyaka Yuki from getting hurt in the danger, because they thought the creature of Suzaku came through these wards as how this got into the power as well. When Tamahome could figure out and realized of how he could fight off Nakago, it's particularly how because Chichiri told Tamahome to carry Miyaka through Chichiri's hat, take straight to this, particularly. Yeah, basically of how... Yeah, during the conflicts of how that between him and Nakago, this goes on particularly. And that's the serious thing of how this got... Yeah, because Yui wanted to take Tamahome away from Miyaka as well. When Chichiri told to go on to follow right after, particularly. Yeah, because they wanted... Yeah, Tamahome wanted to rescue Yui if she's there, but this has gotten to the point, into the process as how this goes. By this time happened in Jonan High School, everyone in Yui... So Miyaka Yuki realized to figure out something happening in school. Of how she's back in there until she is felt consciously of how the monastery, of how Tamahome was there, particularly, and to the point. Yeah, because this has gotten to the moments of how Tamahome has the action feelings for Miyaka Yuki as well. By this time, of course, Chichiri appeared with the Tai Yijun as well, of how the Dachi-san has gotten to the point as how they wouldn't realize he's for years as well. If they wanted to know something to find out from Yui of how what happened which had happened back 3 months ago, particularly of how every parts of how this goes, of how they saw a huge mirror, yeah, in this chapter right there, yeah. And on top of this, basically, if they could realize if Yui was up to something, basically, of how if they wanted to save Yui as well, and as they basically how they wanted to realize if they seen this as well. If they think that Yui is the priestess of Seiryu, of how something has got to this as well, which is so different from before, of how she got sucked to trying to help to escape, particularly of how this basically would have gotten to this. Chapter 18, Only You. When Yui realized of how she is the priestess of Seiryu, has gotten to this, of how, she won't find happiness with Tamahome as well. So Tamahome wanted to know if, he could realize that if Miyaka never comes out of the room, particularly, of how they were trying to save Yui as well, if there's any bad luck happening as to the mirror as well, as how something from above, as how Yui and Miyaka Yuki could have realized that when Hodohori was there, of how the majesty comes, as particularly that they knew that Miyaka Yuki was safe, and when she saw the village was invaded, when she could remembered as how it happened, how that they realized if Miyaka Yuki became the priestess of Suzaku, and how it happened, when she could have realized of how this imagined basically goes on, particularly of how this goes, which it seems to do anything particularly of how this goes, and to pick off where they went to this point, as how they realized, of course, when Tamahome wanted to talk to Miyaka, particularly of how they realized of what he was up to as well. Ever since, basically, of how they're devoting to the search of the constellations for the Suzaku, particularly of how basically to the pack, and Miyaka Yuki realized that Yui is in love with Tamahome and then this wasn't long until Hodohori arrived. Hotohori almost wanted to kill Tamahome, but Miyaka had to stop the fight. If they want anything to say of how there's anything forgiveness happening in this chapter right there. Yeah. However, basically of how... Yeah, he told Hotohori that Tamahome's in love with Miyaka, he could have said. If he could realize, but he would not kill a celestial warrior of Suzaku, which is the misunderstoodment, especially in the presence of the Emperor, or in this chapter. Misunderstoodment happens as well, hasn't it? Speaking of which, if they realized of how, if he was not the Emperor, but the man, Miyaka realized that Tamahome is the man who loves her, basically, of how this basically, if there's any type of the moments as how this goes on. Yeah, because Tamahome always loved Miyaka Yuki in this chapter, particularly of how this goes. Yeah, that's the reason, that's why Tamahome has the affections, love for Miyaka Yuki, particularly, until they heard something suspicious from out of nowhere, of how there's some evil spirits happening from out of nowhere in this chapter, of how they were going to Kyudong as well in this chapter right there. So that's my review on the story on Fushigi Yuugi the Mysterious Play Volume 3 on here. I mean, this is the first time I wanted to explain about it. The story is getting really good, though. The characters on here that are new in this part, you know, like Nakago and Chichiri, and are in this chapter, in this volume as well. I mean, overall, basically, this is your typical manga classic, which is basically an isekai story of how this goes. You know, my score for this manga, a 10 out of 10, basically, as well. Yep. So that's the recommendation for my manga recommendations. If you love, this is the one you want to have in your manga recommendations, especially to binge read on something like Fushigi Yuugi the Mysterious Play, especially if you want to read something to help you get the thing going on, in case you're wondering of how I can learn over the facts. So that's going to be it for my manga review on Fushigi Yuugi Volume 3 for today's manga review for today, you guys. Thank you for watching, but before we go, here's what I'm going to say for this video. Looking back where I reviewed a couple volumes of the Fushigi Yuugi manga, this is the first time I wanted to review Volume 3, which is going to get you covered as well. Hope subscribe for content. My Anime Planet link in the description down below. You can share this video on your Twitter, Facebook. If you have Twitter and Facebook account, all social media, smack the like button if you enjoyed this video. If you want to check out my Anime Planet, the link will be in the description down below. If you want to check out my Anime Planet, because I have a huge backlog of anime and manga on my Anime Planet account as well, by clicking on the link description down below as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below about Fushigi Yuugi Volume 3 as well. Be sure to click on the subscribe button. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for more videos as well. If you're new to my channel as well, smack the notifications bell button. Be sure to get notified also as well for more latest updates. Keep it otaku for this manga review, because this is the first time I wanted to do a manga review on Fushigi Yuugi the Mysterious Play Volume 3 for the first time. This is RuRoniK95 saying thank you for watching my video. I'm glad you liked it. Hope you enjoy it. Hope to see you soon for the next video. Hope you have a great day. And today is Friday, though. This is RuRoniK95 signing off. Thank you for watching my video, and I will see you soon for more videos. Take care. Bye.